What is up, people? We are back on Beyond Earth. Today, we're going to be covering another important aspect of Beyond Earth, and that is the orbital units and the orbital layer of the game that was added. This was probably one of the best additions to the Beyond Earth game from Civ 5 and other Civ products, but it's a little confusing if you're not used to it, and I talked a little bit about it in my basic guide, but didn't cover it in great detail, so we're going to talk about that right now. So as you can see, orbital units, if you don't already know, they're basically satellites. They sit up way up high over your land mass, and they stay up there. They give you a certain bonus, and eventually they will drop down. Now, you construct them the same way that you would construct anything else through the city production screen, and then you launch them. And when you launch them, you go to the orbital layer, which, if you haven't seen it already, it's basically just a darkened version of the map with a blue outline. And as long as you have your satellite placed, you can place your satellite within that blue outline. And the satellite will cover a certain number of tiles away from its center, whether it's 1, 2, or 3. Satellites cannot overlap. You should already know that, but if you don't, you can't have overlapping satellites, and they will stay up there, giving whatever bonus they're giving until they deorbit at whatever time period. You can increase the blue area through a bunch of different means. There's a lot of buildings that do it. There's a couple techs that help you do it, and also the array improvement. It's a tile improvement you can build on any non-resource flatland tile. You build it and it increases your orbital coverage, so then you can put your satellites farther and farther away. Orbital units cannot move with the exception of the Rocktopus Harmony unit, but they can fight. There are certain units that can shoot orbital units, and it works much like taking down a city. And orbital units, there are some that can obviously shoot back, and that's just simple ranged combat. There is no orbital unit that can attack another orbital unit, however, so that is a good thing to keep in mind. And like I said, after a certain amount of time, your satellite will deorbit, which means they'll fall to the ground. It will no longer get a bonus, and sometimes a crashed satellite will show up where it deorbits, and you can send an explorer there to get the expedition module and kind of regather some of what you lost. So, knowing that, what type of orbital units are there and when should you use them? That's what we're going to talk about today. So, let's look at the different units, and we'll go through all the orbital units that exist. The first orbital unit we'll talk about is the All-Seer. It is an orbital unit you place, and it removes all covert agents and intrigue from any city in range. It also prevents any covert agent activity or intrigue increases as long as it orbits. It only has one orbital effect range, and it's up for 30 turns. So that's just good if your city has a high intrigue level. Get any spies right the hell out of there. It's a good defensive satellite for that type of thing. The Deep Space Telescope is our next orbital unit. It's used in a contact victory. Any city in range also receives 25% science overall. So if you have a science-focused city, this is a really nice unit to have over it to really boost your science. It has 2 orbital effect range, and it stays up for 60 turns. So that is a nice science boost, even if you're not going to use it for a contact victory. It's a good thing to have. The next one is the Hollow Matrix. The Hollow Matrix provides 2 culture on tiles you own, and any city in range receives 50% less intrigue from enemy covert agent activity. So, if you were going to have a culture-focused city, say you had Purity, which Purity is probably the biggest one you would use this with, and you had a lot of domes up, you could use this 2 culture to kind of boost the culture from the domes. This is not really one that requires a specialization. Like the Deep Space Telescope is a percentage bonus, so having a specialized city is really helpful. This one is not. This one is just a +2 bonus in general, so it doesn't matter if your city's specialized or not. It just gives you a flat bonus regardless. The Lasercom satellite has an orbital effect range of 1. It stays up for 60 turns. You need it for the Emancipation victory and the Promised Land victory, and it also gives you a 15% science boost overall. So another one that's good for science-focused cities. It's not as good as the Deep Space Telescope. That's not the Deep Space Telescope. The Deep Space Telescope. But the Deep Space Telescope does require Firaxite. So if you can't get Firaxite, the Lasercom satellite is a good choice as long as you can get petroleum and titanium, like pretty much every other satellite requires. Um, the next one we're going to talk about as we move down here, the miasmic condenser. It's good for harmony. Obviously, it does require xenomass. It is an orbital unit that generates miasma on affected tiles starting from the center and moving outward. So if you're playing a harmony game, it's a really good defensive thing to put up, get miasma spread, and for harmony defensive games, this is a pretty good unit to use. On the opposite side, it does have 2 range and 10 turns, and on the opposite side, we have the miasmic repulsor, which gets rid of miasma starting from the center. This also has 2 orbital coverage and 10 turns in orbit. Now, this one doesn't have any prerequisite resources. You don't need titanium or petroleum to use it. The miasmic condenser does require it, but the miasmic repulsor I think might be the only one that doesn't require anything. Don't quote me on that though, solar collectors may not, but I'm going to check that as we get going. Oh, excuse me. Next up is the Orbital Fabricator. This adds +1 production on tiles you own, and it generates 1 to 2 new strategic resources on unimproved tiles across its lifespan. Now, it only has an effect range of 1. It does stay up for 60 turns. This is good to boost your production. You can also put it over areas that you have a new city before you improve the tiles, and it will add some strategic resources. I don't actually know if it spawns strategic resources outside of your borders. I think it does, but I may have heard somewhere that it doesn't. Double check that and leave it in the comments if you want to know. The next unit is the Orbital Laser. It has a range of 3, a combat strength of 70. It is the first military satellite. Stays up for 60 turns, requires petroleum. Obviously, it's an offensive combat unit, so you deal range damage with it. We're going to skip over the phasal teleporter for a second, talk about the Planet Carver, which is the other big combat unit. This one does require titanium, and it only has a range of 2, and it only lasts 30 turns. But its combat strength is 120 as opposed to 70. So, depending on if you need a more focused defense, this is better. If you don't mind having a wider range and a little less strength, the Orbital Laser is a little better, and they do require different tech, so it depends on which tech you feel like getting as well. You do have the Phasal Teleporter, which is one of my all-time favorite orbital units. It only has an effect range of 1 and a turn time of 30, but you put it up and enables units to teleport from any friendly city to any of the tiles underneath your Phasal Teleporter. So this is nice if you have units near your city, your capital. Drop a Phasal Teleporter on, say you settle a new continent, which gives you some orbital coverage. You put down a phasal teleporter and you just warp all your units onto the new continent. You don't even have to cross the ocean and deal with krakens or sea dragons or anything. It's a really nice unit. It's one of my favorites, to be honest. The next orbital unit is the Rocktopus. It is unique to the Harmony affinity, and it is the only satellite that moves and has an upgrade system to it. So it has 60 combat strength, it has a range of 2, it can move 1 tile per turn. It only stays up for 10 turns, and it does require floatstone and xenomass, but it can be upgraded in different ways. So, obviously, if we check out the upgrades for the Rocktopus, where, oh where has my Rocktopus gone? I think I went too high. Ha! I've probably gone over it like 30 times. Right here, Rocktopus. So you have the evolved Rocktopus, which is just straight harmony. It gets a huge, nice combat strength. It also generates miasma in orbit. I think that carries over to all 3. Yep, the unique things, 30% extra when attacking or +1 movement. 30% extra when attacking, or 2 orbital coverage provided by this unit. So it allows you to launch other satellites around it. And then 30% when attacking, and manually deorbit at any time. So if you get sick of having it up, you can just be done with it. So that's really nice. Next up is the Solar Collector. Everyone should know this one. This does not require any prerequisite text like I thought. It does have an orbital effect range of 1 and stays up for 60 turns. Generates +1 energy on tiles you own, and any city within range also receives 20% energy overall. Again, where it's a percentage bonus, a gold specialized city really benefits from a Solar Collector. Next up, we're going to talk about the TACnet Hub. This is an orbital unit that provides 20% ranged and melee combat strength and and a +5 heal every turn to nearby units that are friendly. It has 2 orbital effect coverage. It stays up for 60 turns, and this is really good. If you're playing a defensive game and you have a lot of border cities, putting these up over your border cities makes it a lot more survivable. I highly recommend using these when you get in a situation like that. The last orbital unit is the weather controller. It works very much like the production satellite we looked over earlier. It gives you +1 food on tiles you own. Its orbital effect range is 1 for 60 turns, and it generates 1 or 2 new basic resources on unimproved tiles across its lifespan. So it works very similar to that production, the orbital fabricator, I believe it is. It works very similar to that. It's just food and basic resources versus production and strategic resources. So that's the orbital units. It adds a nice new layer to the game. There's not really much more to it, so that just gives you an overview. Obviously, this is the Civilopedia. If you want to see what text you require, you can obviously just check it out, click climate control, and you can go to the tech web in-game and check it out. So that's going to be it, though. It's really basic. So leave any comments if you have any more questions about orbital units I can answer. Any other Beyond Earth advanced tactics you want me to cover, I will do. Any other tips for players, and then like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video, and I will see you guys next time.